After my financial downfall, the friends who had stood by me for many years cut all connections. That very night, my uncle's family visited the family land behind the village, exhumed my parents' remains, and discarded them by the roadside. My business associates, whom I had collaborated with for years, flung 200 ween at my feet when I sought a loan. My partner of 8 years also abandoned me, turning her back on our relationship and embracing someone else. To degrade me, she invited me to her wedding with her new lover. During the ceremony, she addressed the gathered guests and declared, "I'm expecting a child, but unfortunately it's not yours, it's Mark's." The atmosphere fell silent as countless eyes fixed on me. I stood up, offered a faint smile, and said, "I understand. I want the entire world to forsake me." On the day my friend's business collapsed, he was overwhelmed by a decade-long crisis. It wasn't until that night at a food stall that he broke down, cursing the world. I comforted him, assuring him that there are still many kind and loyal people in the world. The following day, I declared bankruptcy. That night, news of my downfall spread, and I received a call from my childhood friend informing me that my uncle's family had exhumed my parents' remains. Enraged, I drove back to my hometown that same night with my partner of 8 years. At the Liu family's ancestral land, my uncle's relatives had unearthed my parents' coffins and thrown them aside. Trembling with anger, I pointed at my uncle and cursed him. "What are you doing?" Over the years, my uncle had amassed wealth through my company. Even when he misappropriated company funds to buy a house and car for his wife, I ignored it. Now, I saw him and his wife standing beside my parents' remains, smirking at me. My uncle sneered coldly. "Alex, this is our family land. I can bury whoever I want here." I responded bitterly, "You're exploiting my bankruptcy, aren't you? With no money, you're kicking me while I'm down." My partner, Elena, stood silently beside me, her eyes reflecting complex emotions. My uncle's wife mocked. "Alex, don't think we're unaware of your bankruptcy. I heard you owe the bank over $2 billion. Better you perish alone than us having to bury you with your parents." I stared in disbelief. I never expected my closest relations to repay my kindness with hatred. With bloodshot eyes, I shouted, "If anyone dares to touch my parents' remains tonight, I'll fight to the end." My uncle's parents stepped forward with tools and assaulted me until my head was bleeding. In a rage, my uncle brandished a curved knife and attacked my parents' coffins. Outnumbered and overpowered, I was beaten unconscious by my uncle's family. Drenched in blood that night, I knocked on my childhood friend's door, hoping they would help bury my parents. However, upon learning about my bankruptcy, they remained silent and distant. I dragged my battered body from door to door throughout the village, facing rejection each time. Eventually, Tom, who had a past dispute with my family, took pity on me. With help from others, we managed to carry my parents back to his ancestral land and hurriedly buried them that night. Sitting in the car, a deep pain gnawed at my heart, as if my insides were being torn apart. Elena, 3 months pregnant, offered no words of comfort. After a long silence, she asked in a complicated tone, "Alex, did you go bankrupt?" I didn't hide the truth from her and admitted my bankruptcy. "It will get better," I assured her. I feared she would leave me. Trembling, I grabbed her hand. "Elena, I'll borrow money. I'll make a comeback. Please don't abandon me." She agreed reluctantly. With bloodshot eyes, I was humbled to the extreme. Elena pulled her hand away and coldly said, "I'm tired. Call me when you're in the city." Along the way, I tried to joke, attempting to uplift Elena despite my pain. In response, she retorted harshly, "Alex, are you ever not annoying? I just want to sleep. You sound like a nagging old woman. And by the way, your jokes aren't funny at all." I stopped the car, held her hand, and repeatedly apologized. "I'm sorry, Elena. I'm afraid that after my bankruptcy, you'll leave me. Please don't be angry." She responded coldly, "Okay, I'm really scared. I have nothing left now. If you leave me too, I won't be able to handle it." My pleas went unanswered. Throughout, I was brutally beaten by my uncle's family, yet Elena never offered a single comforting word. When we returned to the city in the early morning, Elena, with a cold expression, opened the car door and walked away in her high heels. Just as she was about to leave, she looked back at me. Alex, tonight, you really lost your dignity. I hadn't slept for an entire day and night. I called every friend I knew, but after hearing about my bankruptcy, all the friends who had once been inseparable and admired me completely changed their attitudes. I sadly realized that throughout the day, I hadn't been able to borrow a single cent. In a last-ditch effort, I went to a bar where a business partner often treated me. When he saw me, he sarcastically said, "Oh, isn't this Mr. Lee, our chairman? What brings you here?" Surrounded by laughter, I felt embarrassed to the point of wanting to disappear. My business partner, Michael, sneered, "Mr. Lee, you came here tonight looking for a loan?" I nodded slightly, avoiding his gaze. Michael opened 2 bottles of whiskey and said, "If you can drink these 2 bottles in one go, I might consider lending you some money." Without hesitation, I downed both bottles. In the end, Michael burst into laughter, took out 200 win from his wallet, and contemptuously threw it at my feet. Mr. Lee, no need to borrow money. These 200 win are for you. Don't starve to death." I bit my lip, gazed at the 200 win on the ground, and walked away, feeling lost and broken. Michael had once been a small business owner who had tried to please me, even getting hospitalized for a stomach wash to support me. I had always taken care of him, even spending my own money to help him save his company. We had called each other brothers, but that night, my comforting words to him seemed laughable. All my friends had abandoned me, avoiding me like the plague. I sold my house and car and now wandered the streets, homeless. After drinking the 2 bottles of whiskey, I collapsed by a flower bed and finally managed to call Elena. "Elena, I have nowhere to go. Can I stay at your place for a couple of nights?" On the other end of the line, there was a long silence. Just as I was about to break under the tension, Elena coldly spoke. "Alex, let's break up. Being with you, I'm really exhausted. You can't provide the life I want." Before I could respond, she hung up the phone. I immediately rushed to Elena's house, but she impatiently opened the door and walked out. Seeing her, I dropped to my knees without any dignity left, my voice trembling as I cried, "Elena, please, don't leave me. I have nothing without you. I love you. I really love you so much. I swear I will pull through. Just give me a few years, and I'll give you the life you want." I held on to Elena's legs, devoid of pride, crying uncontrollably. In just a few days, half of the hair on my head turned gray. "Elena, all these years, I bought you bags worth over 100,000, watches worth tens of thousands, sports cars, and villas. I know you still keep those things. If you sell those bags and watches, can you lend me the money?" 8 years, a whole 8 years. Everyone around me treats me like this. I can endure, but you can't. I gave you everything. Elena disdainfully shook off my hand, standing tall with her arms crossed, looking down at me. "Alex, those things were gifts from you. They're my possessions. Why should I sell them all to gamble on an uncertain future with you? I wasted 8 years of my youth on you. Please, let me go, okay?" The arguing drew Elena's parents in. I saw a man named Daniel, Elena's first love. The moment I saw Daniel, it felt like a lightning strike. My body froze. "Alex, my daughter has already moved on. If you dare to harass Elena again, I'll break your legs. Right now, you're worse than a dog." He who had once been polite and smiled at me, now held a kitchen knife and cursed angrily. Panicked, I stammered, "Sir, even the villa you're living in was bought by me. Are you telling me that now you won't help me out of this situation?" Elena's father coldly snorted. "The property deed is in my daughter's name. If you think we're going to sell the house, you're dreaming." Elena's mother wielded a broom and kept hitting me. Daniel watched with a gleeful expression. His family had money, ran a business, and drove a Mercedes SUV. Tonight, he looked at me and sneered, "Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, in 2 weeks, I'm marrying Elena." At that moment, I realized Elena had been secretly in contact with Daniel all along. "Elena," she said indifferently, "tonight you're like a dog. Thank God my daughter left you." Elena's father showed me no mercy. In front of everyone, he belittled me to the point where I felt insignificant. Shaking uncontrollably, I thought, 8 years. I spent nearly 10 million on all of you. I almost gave my life to Elena. So what if it's money? Even without it, life goes on. Elena slapped me hard across the face and yelled sharply, "Alex, can you stop embarrassing me? I don't love you anymore. The life I want, Daniel can give me. You can't. You can't even afford a meal now. Do you want me to support you for the rest of your life?" In the end, Elena's parents kicked me out of her doorstep. I had only 50 yuan left in my pocket. I tried calling every contact in my phone, but to my sorrow, not even 500 yuan could anyone lend me. In the following days, all the office equipment from my company was seized. The collection calls never ceased, just as Daniel had predicted. 2 weeks later, he married Elena. To humiliate me, Daniel specifically prepared an invitation and sent me a photo of it. The wedding cost his family over 2 million yuan. Unwilling to give up, I went to the hotel where the wedding reception was held. I still loved Elena and clung to that last shred of hope. As soon as I entered the banquet hall, countless eyes turned to me. Isn't that the bankrupt Mr. Lee? What gave him the courage to show up today? Watching my partner of 8 years marry another man was too painful. The whispers around me drowned out my thoughts. Ignoring the crowd, I walked straight up to the stage. Amidst the clamor, I grabbed Elena's hand. "Elena, come with me." To my surprise, she forcefully pulled her hand away and, in front of all the guests, slapped me across the face. She mocked me. "Alex, who do you think you are? A penniless man like you is worse than a dog. How dare you try to ruin someone else's wedding?" Laughter erupted from the crowd. Someone deliberately raised their voice, saying, "Mr. Lee, stop embarrassing yourself. Do you even know your place? How dare you come here to steal someone's bride?" Elena's parents rushed onto the stage, punching and kicking me. Her mother sneered, "Alex, have you looked at yourself in the mirror?" At that moment, Elena looked at me with mockery and said, "I forgot to tell you, Alex, I'm pregnant, but the baby isn't yours. It's Daniel's." Hearing those words, my mind went blank. I staggered backward and almost collapsed to the ground. Then I slowly closed my eyes. In the eyes of those watching, I opened my eyes again and smiled bitterly. When I had money, the whole world revolved around me. But now that I'm broke, I'm as low as a dog in your eyes. My uncle's family had exhumed my parents' bodies. All my friends distanced themselves from me. Even my partner of 8 years betrayed me. The crowd watched in silence. As I spoke, tears uncontrollably streamed from the corners of my eyes. In that moment, my heart felt like ashes. "Get off the stage, Lee. All you've done is cling to my daughter just for money, right?" Elena's mother opened her wallet and forcefully threw 1,000 yuan at me. I didn't look at the cash scattered on the ground. Instead, I looked at Elena and asked, "So, was our love really built on money?" Elena gave me a mocking smile. "Do you even have a penny left?" I laughed bitterly and scanned the crowd. Finally, I softly spoke. "Elena, actually, I haven't gone bankrupt." Elena didn't react at all. Instead, the mocking smile on her face grew wider. "Alex, didn't you just want to use this excuse to win me back? You've emptied your company, sold your cars and house. What face do you have left to stand here and talk? What are you waiting for? Hurry up and leave." Elena started calling security. The crowd below began gossiping as well. I think Alex couldn't handle the shock and went mad. Doesn't he know what he looks like trying to steal someone's bride like this? Before I could leave the wedding reception, I saw my uncle's family rushing over, looking tired and dusty. As soon as they saw me, my uncle's wife screamed, "See, I knew it. Elena's getting married today, and I knew Alex would be here." My uncle strode toward me, grabbed my collar roughly, and growled, Lee, don't think that just because your company went bankrupt, everything is over. I still own 5% of the company's shares. At the company's peak, that was worth over $20 million. Hand it over. Under the gaze of the crowd, I calmly looked at my uncle and said, "When I started from nothing, your family was deep in debt from gambling, over $2 million. I used my own money to pay off your debts. Your parents came to me with you, begging for a job and a chance. The 5% of shares you have were also given to you by me. You've embezzled company funds, lived recklessly, and bought your wife a house and car. The debts you dug, I paid to fill. For 8 years, I bought you bags, watches, luxury cars, and villas. What did I get in return?" My uncle's mother sneered. "That was your choice, wasn't it? Alex, you're just an idiot. You've got no one to blame but yourself." My uncle punched me in the face, knocking me to the ground. His broad frame pressed down on me, his foot firmly on my face, while his parents held down my arms and legs. He wouldn't relent, shouting, "Alex, my 5% stake is worth $20 million, not a penny less. Don't think I don't know where you buried your parents. If you don't hand over the money, I'll go back to the village and dig up your parents' bones. Feed them to the dogs." My uncle's parents laughed, their amusement cruel. Elena, arms crossed, looked at me with satisfaction. My uncle's mother then suggested, "How about we just strip him of everything he's worth and sell it to pay the debt? Debt should be paid. It's only right." I struggled wildly, but it was useless. My uncle's foot remained firmly planted on my face. Daniel laughed. "Even if you beat him to death, he still won't have a penny to his name." My uncle said, "It's fine if he can't pay up. Alex, don't forget how you used to boss me around back then. If you crawl through my legs in front of everyone today, I'll let you go." At that moment, I finally broke free, my mind a blank, and threw a punch at my uncle's face. Before I could land the second punch, my uncle knocked me to the ground, blood pouring from my head. His strike was brutal. I curled up on the ground, clutching my head. Soon, my uncle's wife and his parents joined in, and within minutes, I was lying in a pool of blood, on the brink of death. Elena simply coldly said, "Drag him out. Don't dirty up my wedding reception." I was thrown into a car and dumped in front of the hospital. Nurses rushed to carry me inside, my face mangled and nearly disfigured. I stayed in the hospital for several days. During my stay, I saw photos of Elena and Daniel's honeymoon on social media. In the photos, Elena looked sweet and happy, leaning against Daniel's chest. On her wrist was the watch I had bought for her, worth hundreds of thousands. Throughout my hospital stay, not a single person came to visit me. A week later, I finally managed to leave the hospital. The opening ceremony for Nova Group was about to begin. Ignoring my still healing injuries, I dressed in a suit, hailed a taxi, and arrived early. As soon as I arrived at the entrance, I saw 5 brand new Bentleys parked outside. To my surprise, I ran into Elena's family and many of my former business partners. Even my uncle's family had entered the venue with the business owners they'd become acquainted with over the years. Inside the dazzling venue, the place was already packed. When Elena saw me, her face first showed confusion, then quickly turned into a disdainful sneer. "Alex, what are you doing here?" Daniel, my uncle, and his parents turned around at the sound of her voice. I spread my arms and smiled. "I'm here for the opening ceremony of Nova Group." For some reason, I didn't feel angry at Elena anymore. When I looked at her, I wasn't furious or heartbroken. I felt nothing. Daniel shook his head and laughed. "Alex, you know today is Nova Group's opening ceremony. Do you really think you're still the old Lee, the CEO? If you knew it was Nova Group, then you should know this isn't the kind of place a beggar like you should be at." My uncle's mother spoke up. "I think this Lee guy is so broke, he can't even afford a meal. Who knows where he heard the news and came here to skim food and drinks?" She continued, raising her voice and shouting for attention. All the bosses listened as her words instantly drew everyone's attention in the room. The crowded Nova Group's opening ceremony turned to look at me. My uncle's mother pointed at me with a sneer. "Beware of this beggar. His name is Alex. His company has gone bankrupt, and he's so poor he can barely eat. He snuck in here to steal food. Keep an eye on your valuables. Don't let this beggar take them while you're distracted." With that, my uncle's family also turned their attention to me. At that moment, I felt like the center of attention. My uncle walked toward me and laughed. "Alex, I didn't expect you to be so tough, managing to get out of the hospital after just over a week. You didn't sneak in here to steal something, did you?" The commotion caught the attention of the hostess. She came over to me and asked to check my invitation. I shook my head. "I don't need an invitation to be here." Elena, who had been watching the scene unfold, couldn't hold herself back any longer. She looked at me and mocked. "Alex, in a place like this, you don't even count as a fart. Who do you think you are, the boss of Nova Group, and you say you don't need an invitation?" Amid the laughter and mockery from the crowd, I casually nodded and smiled. "You're right, I am the boss of Nova Group." Elena rolled her eyes. "Alex, I think you've really lost it. Good thing I broke up with you back then." My uncle laughed loudly. "Lee, if you're the boss here, then I must be Jesus. Don't put a pig's nose through a leak, pretending to be an elephant." I ignored their insults. I wasn't bothered by them anymore. They could do whatever they wanted. But one day, I would get back at them tenfold, or even 100-fold. I reached out and, under my uncle's astonished gaze, slapped him across the face. "Pablo, you'll regret this soon enough." My uncle's wife sneered. "Lee, I think you should leave now. You're not in a place where you can act up like this. Nova Group is a key focus of the city, and if anything goes wrong, you won't be able to handle the consequences. Where are the security guards? Get this beggar out of here." The room fell silent. Even my former business partners wore strange smiles. Before anyone could say anything else, a woman in a stylish outfit took the microphone and walked up to the stage. Everyone knew the opening ceremony of Nova Group was about to start. I found a seat and sat down casually. The woman on stage talked about the future development and grand vision of Nova Group. She spoke quickly and efficiently, then addressed the crowd. "Next, let's invite our Nova Group's chairman to give a speech." At that moment, I slowly stood up and walked toward the stage. As I walked past Elena, she froze for a moment and said, "Alex, the chairman of Nova Group is called that, not you." On the other side, my uncle's family and several of my former business partners all looked at me. I ignored them, turned to Elena and smiled, saying, "I told you, I am the chairman of Nova Group. Don't you know that Nova Group is a restructured company? We broke up the old group, integrated resources, and created something much larger. But with someone like you who only cares about money, you wouldn't understand." As I walked toward the stage, several senior company executives seated closest to the podium stood up one by one. They nodded and greeted me. "Chairman Lee, Chairman Lee." The number of people standing and acknowledging me increased. Step by step, I walked onto the stage and took the microphone from my assistant. I didn't offer any polite pleasantries. Instead, I looked down at Elena's family and my uncle's family. Their faces paled. Today, during the opening ceremony of Nova Group, I have a few announcements to make. First, as the chairman of Nova Group, I am announcing that from now on, we will be suspending all business collaborations with former clients. Second, I will unite with some like-minded friends to target Daniel's family business. Third, the entire legal department of Nova Group will do everything in its power to sue Pablo for embezzlement and illegal appropriation of company funds at his previous company. Fourth, I will recover every cent I spent over the past 8 years on my ex-girlfriend. With every word I spoke, Elena's face grew paler. As for my uncle, he was already slumped to the ground, his face ashen. I stood on the stage, smiling at my uncle. The amount of embezzled funds he stole was enough to put him in prison for life, although I had personally covered those debts. I have kept all the evidence of his embezzlement close to me. After making these statements, I looked back at Elena. I've never gone bankrupt. In fact, my business is expanding more and more, and I've built it into a large group. I handed the microphone back to the senior executives and turned to leave the stage. Before I could reach the elevator, Elena and my uncle's family rushed over to me. Elena, emotional, grabbed my arm and spoke frantically. "Alex, if you weren't bankrupt, why did you lie to me?" I shrugged and smiled. When did I ever say I went bankrupt? The company simply restructured and needed a larger space. You mistook it for bankruptcy. Since you think I'm bankrupt, I just went along with your idea and pretended to be bankrupt. If I hadn't, would I have been able to see your true colors? Elena panicked. She gripped my hand tightly. I'm sorry, Alex. I didn't mean to. It's my parents. After they found out you were bankrupt, they kept pressuring me to break up with you. She turned to shout at my uncle's parents. It's all your fault. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have broken up with Alex. In a fit of anger, Elena pushed her mother-in-law to the ground. You two old fools. Why did you force me to marry Daniel? It's all your fault. Elena hurriedly knelt in front of me. Alex, please, forgive me. Give me another chance. Please. If it weren't for my parents, I would never have broken up with you. I kicked Elena away, coldly speaking to her. Elena, have I ever given you a chance? Do you know? That night, when I kneeled in front of you and begged you not to leave, I was giving myself one last bit of hope. Elena, we'll see each other in court. Everything your family has spent of mine over these years, I'll take back. Every single cent. My uncle and his wife were blocking the elevator doors. My uncle was already pale with fear. His wife and parents pulled at my arms, pleading for me not to call the police. I slapped my uncle's wife across the face and coldly said, I've already been more than generous to your family. I can let anyone off, but not your family. It seemed like something clicked in my uncle's wife's mind. She quickly said, Alex, don't forget, my husband still has 5% of the shares in your company. I smiled and responded, 5% of the shares were in the old company. What does that have to do with the current Nova Group? Besides, haven't you even looked at the contract? There's a clause that says the shares were given to you for free. But if I ever change my mind, I can buy them back for $1 at any time. You can't refuse. You fools didn't read it carefully. You heard that I was giving you shares and eagerly signed your names without thinking. My uncle's family was utterly hopeless now. My uncle's parents began cursing at me. Alex, Pablo is your uncle. We're family. I laughed in anger, pointing at these two old people and yelled, Family? When I went bankrupt that night, you exhumed my parents' bones from the Lee family's ancestral land. You five beat me until my head was bloody, and at Elena's wedding, you tortured me to the brink of death. Did you treat me like family then? I crouched down on the floor and slapped my uncle's face. Pablo, with the more than 10 million you embezzled, you'll be doing hard labor in prison for many years. Trash. Even if I lose everything, I'll make sure your whole family never finds peace. I tried to leave, but Elena grabbed onto my foot. Alex, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I'll get an abortion and divorce Daniel if you're willing to forgive me. I can sever ties with my parents right now. I smiled at her. Elena, you're just a woman who lifts others up only to step on them. Now that you've come crawling back to me, I don't even want to look at you. I can't even imagine a woman more worthless than you. Get ready to sell your house and car. I kicked Elena off and turned to enter the elevator. No sooner had I left, the police arrived and took my uncle Pablo away. As for the house and car, I sold them. I wanted to buy a bigger villa and upgrade to a more luxurious car brand. After the bankruptcy, I saw human nature for what it truly was. In front of a Bentley, I saw my friend, the one who had failed in a business investment with me. He looked at my nearly gray hair and smiled. Looks like you've been through more than I have these days. Alex, did I win the bet? I nodded slightly. You won. My friend sighed. Our bet has turned out to be meaningless. I shook my head and denied it. No, to me it was very meaningful. You showed me human nature. I only came up with this idea on a whim while the company was restructuring, but I ended up losing terribly. If it weren't for the impromptu bet between us, I wouldn't have pretended to go bankrupt. I wouldn't have seen people's true colors. They had been lurking around me, shamelessly draining me dry. The next day, my uncle's wife and his parents found my newly bought villa. They knelt at the door, begging me to let Pablo off the hook. They looked remorseful, crying and pleading. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window on the second floor, watching with interest. When I no longer had any use for you, you didn't even have the right to see me. My heart had become colder, more merciless. After watching my uncle's family's miserable state, I called the property management and had them send security to escort these pests out of the villa community. The legal department in my company was efficient. Almost the day after my uncle was arrested, they presented all the evidence of his embezzlement. Because the evidence was complete, the collection process was skipped. After being detained for 5 or 6 days, my uncle was handed over to the court for prosecution. Pablo had embezzled $12 million, a large amount with serious consequences. He was sentenced to 12 years with no chance of appeal, and all his illegal earnings were to be recovered. If he couldn't pay it back, he'd have to sell his house and cars. The situation unfolded too quickly for my uncle to transfer any assets. All the cash and real estate under his name were seized by the court. As for Elena's family, in an effort to win me back, Elena severed ties with her parents. Her parents didn't show up, but Elena sat at the entrance of my new villa every day. No matter how many times I tried to drive her away, she remained unmoved. I blocked her number and deleted her on social media. She kept shouting in front of my villa, "Alex, I was wrong. I shouldn't have listened to my parents and broken up with you. We've been together for 8 years. Can you really just abandon me?" I couldn't take it anymore and opened the villa door. Elena immediately rushed forward, trying to push the door open to enter the villa, but I stopped her with my hand. "Elena, how did I never realize how thick your skin is? What status do you have to think you deserve to step foot in this villa?" Elena grabbed my hand. She refused to let go. "Alex, give me a chance to make things right. I will compensate you double. I've had an abortion and severed ties with my parents. If you don't want me, I'll be homeless. Do you really have the heart to let me freeze to death on the street?" I forcefully shook her off and coldly sneered. "Your life or death has nothing to do with me." Elena cried out, "You really are a two-faced person. Right now, Pablo's already been sent to prison. Now it's your turn." Elena's face turned pale with despair. I dialed the police, reporting that a woman with ill intentions had been loitering in front of my house every day. I suspected she was casing the place, waiting for an opportunity to rob me. Elena was taken away by the police. Her prosecution proceeded as planned. Every large sum of money I had transferred to Elena, the bags, the watches, were all given with the intent of marriage, even though there was no written agreement. The court supported it. It took me several days to organize all the gifts I'd given Elena over the past 8 years. The total came to more than $30 million, including the villa where she now lived, which I had bought for $15 million. The 4 or 5 luxury cars under her name were worth over $10 million, over $30 million. And not once did Elena contribute a penny when I pretended to go bankrupt. Despite this, she still had the audacity to kneel in front of her house and beg. The court quickly scheduled a trial for Elena. As the plaintiff, I presented all the records of the large transfers to Elena, invoices for luxury items like bags, watches, cars, and the villa. It was a thick stack of evidence. Elena tried to resist, but with the overwhelming evidence, the trial didn't take long, and the verdict was handed down. She lost the case and was ordered to pay back over $30 million. In the courtroom, Elena collapsed. Even though she had severed ties with her parents, their villa would now be repossessed and auctioned off. Years ago, Elena's family sold their old house to move into the villa, but now they had squandered the money. In other words, Elena's parents would have nowhere to go. With over $30 million in debt, they couldn't even afford to rent a house. I ignored their pleas as I walked out of the courtroom. That night, I had been confident in front of my friend, believing that no one would ever abandon me. Now, as I look back on the past month, all the experiences have boiled down to 2 words: human nature. After pretending to go bankrupt, I left chaos in my wake. All those who had kicked me when I was down didn't escape. Everything they had taken from me would be paid back tenfold. This revenge was far from over. It had just begun.